And yeah, this is all just work in progress. Brent, you know how this stuff goes.
Yep.
Um, so thank you everybody for who's going to watch this after I splice off that first half, and I just want to welcome Brent Marshall to this podcast. After ranking first place in the agent to agent payments hackathon, so I'm going to have, and for those that don't know, as part of this hackathon we ran last month, all of the winners, whether they were first, second, or third, get to be broadcasted on the show so we can learn the human stories behind people building agents. So without further ado, I'm just going to welcome Brent Marshall to introduce himself, maybe just a little bit of a high-level background. And then Brent, from there, I'll just ask you some high-level questions, and we'll just keep it casual.
Yeah, sounds great. Hey everyone, I'm Brent, and I'm a freelancer in the slash consultant in the experiential space. So over the past couple of years, I've been building out interactive installations for some big name companies, and having a lot of fun doing that. Within the past probably 2 years, a lot of the requests that have been coming my way have been all AI based. And so I've been building big installations based on mostly the projects that I've been involved with have been Gemini based. So a lot of Google integrations. I just spent the past month in San Francisco working on Google Pixel House, and at the NBA All-Star Game, and some other fun projects like that.
That's so cool. And that was the project for the pictures you sent me on LinkedIn, I believe, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. So for those that want to get context, I'm just going to do a quick screen share of what you have in your feed, Brent, so that people watching will be able to see just an example of what you're talking about, because I thought this was really, really cool. It doesn't have all the pictures you sent me, but nonetheless, maybe we can speak to that, because I'd really like just to get a better, people to get a better understanding of you. So how do you find your way into this type of work? What's your backstory leading up to getting into this field? This seems like really exciting work, but as you told me, a lot of heavy lifting goes before the fun reveal. But how does Brent end up getting here? What's your backstory leading up to this point of your career?
Oh, there was a lot of pigheadedness involved with it, and stubbornness. And whenever people told you can't do something, you just keep doing it. This project here is actually the Google Pixel fan club that was at the National Women's Sports League championship game in Kansas City. And so this was back in November, I believe. And what they had asked me to do is, it was built up by a bunch of different agencies. Robot Company was the company that Google hired to produce this. And then Google turned around and said, well, we don't have any Gemini integrations here. And so that's when I got the call. I was working with a company called Deep Local, which is based out of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And Deep Local called me up and said, you're our expert on this. And so then I got sent down to Kansas City and had to do a Gemini integration inside of a metal can, with bands playing outside and lots of loud noise. And I had to do a speech to text integration with Gemini Live. So that was challenging. And then following the success of that project, I got another call for the NBA All-Star Game, and which was it was an interesting project, but it was another Gemini integration, and they wanted so Robot Co hired Deep Local again, and Deep Local hired me, but they turned around and said, we would like you to manage 200 Google Pixel 9 Pro XL loaner phones, and pass them out to people that come into our space, and don't lose any.
Oh my God.
Um, so these are like over $1,000 phones a piece, and we're going to give them out to people and then make sure
Wow.
they come back. So I was involved with the technical direction on this particular project, and there were lots of different agencies. So there was there was Google, there was Robot Code, there was Deep Local, there was MKG. It was like a big laundry list of agencies all working on individual parts for the project. And then I came in and had to run the tech that bound everything together. And so we were using Gemini Live. We used Gemini Pro with Vertex AI. And then there was a bunch of lens integrations. And then on top of that, you have the Google client coming in and telling you at the last second that, oh, no, you're instructing all of your brand ambassadors incorrect. And so then I had to go back and adjust the way that they teach the general public when they come in how to use Gemini. And so the fun thing about that project was we ran it for 3 days. The first day we had a bit of a scare because we actually thought we lost some devices. But we did a physical count at the end of the night, and we had 100% success in
Wow.
returning devices. And at the end of the 3 days, we're like, we've got to lose one device.
Yeah,
right?
no kidding, right?
We had 100% return success rate. So there are still good people out there
Yeah.
who are genuinely interested in using the product and then handing it back to us when they're done.
Yeah, that's exceptional that they all made, and everybody's going to want to know your secret. How did they all make those phones? How did the phones all make it back? Okay, that's cool. And you mentioned part of that technical challenge being in a tin can or something. What was the engineering challenge around that?
We actually, so it's a voice-based interaction. So we're
Okay.
using Gemini Live, and got to make sure my phone doesn't turn on when I call it out like that. But the it's almost like, you know, when you go into an office and you've got those privacy booths where you can take a
Yes.
call,
Yeah.
and they manage the soundproofing on those booths so that you don't hear other people talking.
Yeah.
We managed to block out with sound foam around the outside of the booth pretty well. So we could have a person walk into this room and have a conversation with Gemini Live. The one thing that we didn't take into account was the fact that we had two of these booths back to back. And so you could actually hear one person talking from one room into the other, and it could like affect the other person's Gemini Live interaction.
Oh wow.
So those were the little things that you always experience some sort of like thing that you have to figure out.
Some edge case, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was one of the things that one of the challenges we had within this little tin can.
Well, what I like about that story, and even the pictures you showed me, and I think I mentioned this to you, is that it was such a in the real world experience versus a lot of thinking about UX or interaction design can sometimes just be on an app and right in front of you, and it's not this immersive experience. So I'm really fascinated about the challenges that come around that type of experience design, because as you just pointed out, like you don't know these things till you're in the field. So that's quite exciting. And then as far as you being involved with interactive experiences or immersive technologies, has that always been something you've been passionate about, or did you stumble into that? How did you get into that?
Yeah, sorry, I kind of didn't answer that question earlier, but
That's okay.
I've always been passionate about that. So back in when I was in university, so late 90s, I was invited on a trip out to Japan, and I visited the NTT Opera House, and I saw in person for the very first time Daniel Rosen's first the wooden mirror installation, and that one literally made me take a couple steps back and say, okay, this is what I want to do. That was the moment.
And so for people that don't know the wooden mirror, do you want to describe that? I think I know what it is, but what is the wooden mirror?
Okay, so imagine an octagonal shaped thing. It's probably like 2 meters by 2 meters, big octagon sitting on a wall with thousands and thousands of wooden Scrabble pieces, and none of them have letters on them, so they're just wooden blocks. And behind each of them is a servo motor, and the servo motor moves. And there's in the middle of this piece, there's a little hole, and there's a webcam. You got to understand, this is like 1990s technology too, so this is cutting edge for that point. And this camera would take a low resolution black and white video of you, and then there was a spotlight at the top that was shining down at a particular angle.
Oh, wow.
And then what these Scrabble pieces would do is each one individually would adjust itself to give you 255 tones of gray.
That's crazy.
And so you're standing in front of this, and it's taking a picture of you, and it's reproducing a mirror image of your face in wood. And
I found an image that I'm going to share, but you did a great job describing it. Is this what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, that's incredible. And so this thing would move if you moved your hands?
Your whole body.
Oh,
so
wow.
Yeah, as you moved in and out, there was a little tiny webcam there. People are still reproducing this today. Like, it was that cool. Impactful for a lot of people. That was probably the moment that I came home and I was like, I need to do this, and I need to get into this industry. And I've never gotten out of it, and it's never been dull to me. I've always been really excited by it. I went into web development. Back in the days when you used to code everything by HTML and JavaScript, and CSS was a new thing. And then I got frustrated with how ephemeral all the websites were.
Yeah.
You would build them, they would be up for a month, and then they disappear. And I was like, I want to build permanent installs like this. And so I jumped into the experiential industry, and I started to build Connect-based installations. I started to build like interactive things. So a lot of Arduino usage, a lot of
Very cool.
touch points and things like that. And at one point, I was invited by a good friend of mine to build out the Molson Canadian beer fridge. And
I remember that.
Yeah, so there were several versions of it. I got to build two of them. The first version was the passport fridge, and which required you to put in your Canadian passport.
I remember that. Yeah, it's clever.
And then it would unlock the fridge if you proved that you were Canadian. So these are coming back in vogue because of this whole trade war thing that's going on right now. Timing. But yeah, so this one here, so this is the passport fridge. I got involved with this one it was built in London because they didn't want to pay for shipping when they fabricated it. Now you see that one, the bottom one here. So that's the passport fridge.
Yeah.
The one with the guy in front of it singing.
This one on the harbor?
That's the one that I built.
Okay.
So this one required you to sing the Canadian anthem in order for it to open. And so you can see a bunch of LED lights on there. So that was an Adafruit ring light there, and we had a mag lock in there to unlock the fridge. But this was before AI existed, and so the question was, like, how do we understand that someone is singing the Canadian anthem versus the US anthem or the Russian anthem, and also maybe make it work in both languages, so English and French, but you can't use any AI, or there was no AI. So there were things like voice. I'm trying to think. Dragon dictation, I think, existed.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And but it all required an internet access, and we knew that we would be placing these things in the forest. We'd be placing them on bridges, and they wouldn't have any internet access. And this is probably before we had like a lot of wide use of SIM cards and the way that we can throw a PEPWave modem in there and get things up and running. And so what we ended up doing was, and I claim no ability to have figured this out. This was my good friend Adam's responsibility, but he basically suggested that we look for the gain levels on the microphone and look for, if we give people a time code, so a click track essentially to sing the anthem to. So we had a speaker playing the music. And then we looked for the gain levels of the microphone in between the words of "Oh Canada," pause, and then we ran a running average of these drops in the gain.
Wow.
We could develop a fingerprint
That's
over the
crazy.
anthem. And because the Canadian anthem works the way that it does, we could do it in both English and French. But it's really hard to sing the American anthem to the pace of the Canadian anthem. So if you could do that, then you can fool the system and you can pop the fridge
Gotcha.
open. But nobody
But it
managed to
worked.
do that. It worked.
It got what you needed to do, get done, right? It was a clever
Yeah.
solution.
And nowadays we would probably hit it with the big AI stick.
Of course. Why wouldn't you, right?
So you would probably like do a local model and have things like recognize your words and
Yeah.
but so it's interesting when you look back at some of these projects and you try to think, well, how would I build that today? And how is it any different? But that was a really fun project. That one sort of got a lot of attention, and it was a lot of fun to play around with.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, it's such creative work to be out in the field, experiencing these edge cases, and then really coming up with clever engineering solutions. So fascinating. And then, as you mentioned, sort of like AI or LLMs weren't around back then, so you really had to get hyper creative on solving some of these things. So let's sort of pivot then into the current day and think about now things are getting really easy because of LLMs. Do you think, and then this is a discussion I'm having with many people, is there's this fear that we're going to start losing potentially some of our critical thinking or ability to like troubleshoot, because you're always running into these frictions like you were expressing in these projects. All of a sudden, if the AI gets really, really good and it's just solves stuff all the time, what's your thoughts on some of on that around, the being so powerful that it affects us as humans to use our critical thinking? Do you worry? Have you thought about that? Do you worry about that, or is it just not really?
I think about it all the time. I was the tech director at Deep Local and had a bunch of creative techs that I was leading on various projects. So it would be this ever-changing roster of creative technologists that would be building projects, and I would be scoping out the projects and making sure that I had the technical direction for all those projects set up. And I really liked working with a lot of these developers. They were really fascinating. Every single person was very unique to deal with. So I'm not going to say anything bad about them, but there was a reliance on AI to help out your coding, to get through things. And so this could be Copilot, this could be ChatGPT, this could be a number of different things. What bothered me is that there was an increased reliance on younger developers to use these tools to allow them to accomplish things that they didn't quite understand. And so when a bug came up, it wasn't an easy solve. It was sort of like, I've got to go back and think about this tonight, and then I'll come back tomorrow and give you a solution. And so I feel that, like an old school developer, like I'm probably a little bit on that side. An old school developer would probably turn around and say, okay, well, I know the system in and out, and I can give you a solution relatively fast. And so that was an area where the initial development of that core concept was really fast. Like it was unbelievably fast, and it surprised me. But the moment that you got into bug fixing, that's when I started to run into issues with other developers and being like, okay, well, wait a second, this seems like a fairly easy thing to ask for. Like, can you just solve this? And so I think that's where my conflict happens with it.
Yeah.
And I think at the hackathon, like I was talking to you about various coding tools. Copilot was like the start of this.
It was
slow
then Cursor and and Windsurf. Sorry, go on.
Yes,
Keep going, Brent.
I think during the hack event, I dove into windsurf, and I
Yeah.
was like, okay, well, you've mentioned this to me.
Yeah.
I'm going to start experimenting. And windsurf was interesting because I started hitting it with LangChain, and I was like, okay, I've always wanted to like learn AutoGen and LangChain and start
Yeah.
to get it. And I'm a newbie in terms of this framework. So let's go in with windsurf. And windsurf, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna like chat with it and see if I can develop this. And it was successful. Like I got results out of it, and I did an early build within that 24-hour period. I did a fairly quick build of something, and then I started to get a little too creative, and I started to prompt it for a little too much,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and then it broke it,
Yeah.
and then I couldn't figure out how to get back. and and then I started a fresh version of the application, and then I started with smaller steps
Yeah.
in the prompt, and I got what I wanted. But it was funny because once I took a bigger step, like it really did break it,
Yep.
and um, I think that's the part that I probably have to learn how to use the tool a little bit
Mhm.
better. But it was the hack event was like a really good test process
Yeah.
for me, and it was a good environment to actually make that mistake and try to learn from it.
Oh, yeah. Great point. So I tried to figure out like what motivates people to come to these, not only to the ETH Waterloo event that I ran in 2017, but because back then it was all blockchain hype. There was a large draw towards this being such a radical change that it drew people in to learn. But I guess AI is the same sort of hype, um, and that's why I thought agents were such a paradigm shift that it'd be worthy of running another hackathon early enough to see if I was just crazy or if other people were seeing similar patterns. But it sounds like you were already onto this before the hackathon, and I totally agree that you got to use these tools to start figuring out how we're playing with this new uh, gift. And I experienced the same thing, Brent, where I was like, when I first started using, well, I didn't mind Cursor until it asked me that I had to remember to at the code base when I wanted more context. So I think I told you, yeah, I wrote a book about contextual intelligence. And for me, the more context I have about something, the faster I can get towards an answer or an understanding around the thing. And I've been trying to learn to develop for a long time and just never had somebody patient enough beside me to go, hey, I'm stuck. Hey, I'm stuck. Can you help me out? It's like, you don't want to annoy a senior engineer when it's like, I really want to learn, but I don't also want to bog my colleagues down. So I never able to got really into the full deep development learning curve until Windsurf or Cursor. Because now I was just able to get out of it myself, right? Go, hey, what does this mean? What does that mean?
Have you ever tried that development process where you talk to the duck?
No, I heard that's a thing. I recently
Yeah.
heard that's a thing.
So your technical director comes around and drops a plastic duck on your desk, and then you have to like explain your
Oh,
code to the duck. But the code assistants are basically that, except that the duck talks back.
gotcha.
And
That makes sense because yeah, now that I've been using them long enough, I can really see something else that you described is if you ask it too much, it's just too much complexity. It's too much at once right now. Maybe that changes later, but right now it's like, don't ask it to do 5 things at once, Ian. Just ask it to do one thing at a time. So I've really learned to sort of like figure out how to just take it one step at a time rather than asking too big of an ask. But yeah, so cool. And then to the hackathon, let's pivot over to the fact that you came in first place with Jeff, Haney, Fabio, and Sam. They're all going to be coming on independently. But I wanted to do one-on-one just so that people get to know who you are and who these developers are or humans are behind the stories. Because I imagine in the future there's going to be more and more agentic systems in the world. And I don't want to lose sight of what are the human stories behind this stuff? Does it make us more human? Because I don't want us to repeat sort of what we've seen with social media and like the pulling away of humanity. I believe agentic systems are going to allow us to have more human connection if we make things sort of in the background, right? Like the best UI is no UI, right? I really wish I could do this podcast in person, but there is a benefit to some of the technology. So let's pivot into the hackathon again. With first place, you guys came up with AI OSS maintainer or autonomous open source maintenance. Can you walk us through that, Brent, or maybe even start with the starting of the hackathon? What was your thoughts on that? How did you get into the team? Did you do it before you started? What was that like?
So before the hackathon, I saw your post and announcing it, and I was like, okay, this is something that I want to learn. So I'm going to go in, and if I can confess something, I was like, okay, you're going to have sessions from the different sponsors of the event to talk about the different AI agent process, and I was thinking, I could just sit in on those and learn about those and then take off and then work on it at home. And then I'm sitting at this boardroom table and with what turned out to be my group, and I didn't know it at the time. I knew no one in the room. I think I've met you from previous events, but that doesn't count. And then all of a sudden the learning sessions ended and the 5 people around me were like, let's all be a group.
Oh, cool.
And then I was like, I can't go home now. And so I got stuck with them, and it was kind of a good thing. But none of us knew each other, and it was an ad hoc group, and it was kind of amazing. Some of us had coding skills, some of us didn't.
Okay.
I have a little bit of a background in blockchain stuff, but I wouldn't call myself an expert. And so this project sort of involved AI plus blockchain in ways that I wasn't really anticipating until I did some of my research at the beginning. And so I'm walking into this environment where I was like, okay, well, I don't know what we're going to build. And the group of us, the 5 of us, didn't know what we were going to build. And that led to some interesting conversations because everybody's trying to like feel out their place in the group.
And
we're trying to figure out what everybody's good at.
What are you gonna do?
And so that was an interesting environment, and everybody was learning at their own pace too. And so there were lots of quiet moments where we decided that, probably the best way to go. I think we were dealing with Masumi, Story Protocol, FXN. Those were the three primary new frameworks that we were trying to learn at the time. And so the group of the 5 of us sort of split off, and we're like, okay, I'm going to focus in. I think I chose Masumi, and so there were, and then Jeff, I think, focused on FXN, and someone else.
Well, you divide and conquered.
Yeah, so we all kind of went quiet, and we put on headphones, and then we just started watching the videos just to see if we could work through some of the documentation. And then we came back. What's that brainstorming technique? It's like a divide and conquer and then regroup. But basically it was similar to that.
Okay.
We basically came back to the table about an hour later, and then we all presented our learnings, and then we said, okay, well, how can we actually build the MVP, like the smallest successful version of this? I think at that point we also had a conversation saying, hey, I know there's prize money at the table, and I don't think we're going to win it because we're all learning from scratch. So there was an early recognition that there was no chance in hell that we were going to get it. And I think Samuel and I started to work with Masumi, and we built an early prototype with, and I think Hani came in with some Docker knowledge and some of the backend CMS. He was familiar with that particular CMS that he was dealing with. And so the three of us kind of worked on one prototype. So we had one Git repo where we were all pushing content to it. And then we reviewed that. And then I think Jeff turned around and said, okay, I think I understand this from the FXN side of things.
Okay.
And so then there was a lot of talk about the blockchain side of things and making that transaction successful. So we were working on test chains so that we weren't actually dealing with any actual money for the test transactions. And I think at that point, we all broke for the evening and then went into our own little environments. And there was a certain level of guilt involved. So I was sitting there at night. I had dinner. I had seen my family again, and I'm like, everybody else is working on something. I better keep going. And so then it went all night, and we passed messages back and forth, and we came back in the next morning, and Jeff had finished a concept of this, and he had a video that was. I think, what was it? Was it a minute long that we had to do?
It was great. And then one of my constraints was 3 minutes, which was unrealistic. But at that time, I didn't know, and that kind of put unrealistic pressure on you guys. But I was like, well, for the other teams that already had submitted videos at 3 minutes, I thought it would be an unfair advantage. But you guys ended up pulling it off. I remember you telling Jeff, and he's kind of like, you got to be kidding me. It's like, right? It's kind of like the person who doesn't realize how hard it was just to get everything done. But anyways, keep going. So yes, it was, you guys had to reshoot that video.
Well, we didn't reshoot it actually. So,
okay.
So we used another AI tool to edit all of the
clever,
like unneeded sections out of it. Yeah. And then Jeff was like, we cut it out. We got it pretty close to 3 minutes. I think it was like 3 minutes, 1 second or something like that. And we're like, success, submit, and got it in. So I'm not sure if the final version that was pushed online was the 3 minute version of the longer version.
I don't know, man. But one of the things, Brent, was that I had this idea when I first launched this to you can't really see it, but it's on the side. It says brilliance is forged by constraints. And I wanted to do something completely crazy so that I would weed out the people that actually don't like a challenge. Now, so this was originally a 10-hour hackathon. And then I had talked to some of the sponsors, and they're like, yeah, you're just crazy. What are you doing? So they convinced me to not do 10 hours and do it to 24. So I think I was too aggressive on the pressure and the constraints to force creativity, right? Because when you come up to these things, that's where creativity can then come up with interesting solutions. But you guys absolutely knocked it out of the park. So let me just explain to everybody. I want you to explain it, but I'll do another screen share because that was a cool little backstory into how your team formed. But maybe just share from a high level what the project ended up being. What was the autonomous open source maintenance system all about?
Well, I think the goal was to create an AI bot that can go onto a marketplace and find another AI bot that can do a task for you. Negotiate terms, submit a payment, and then have that bot do the work and then respond with the results of that work. And so that was sort of, we were using the FXN protocol for that. We had done research into Masumi and I think it was that the Cardano chain. So there's that technical information. Yeah. In this particular example, I think Jeff comes back. Jeff basically took it in his particular direction because he had the knowledge of that, so he can give you the fine details on that section. We
don't have to get into the fine details, but just high level, kind of.
Yeah, he was mostly interested. I think his background was mostly in development security systems.
Yeah.
So it kind of doesn't matter what your end bot is doing, but basically it's this process that you're using to get there. And so the initial task was basically building our system so that we can find an agent that is on the marketplace
Yeah.
that provides application security
Yeah.
and then can analyze it, and then negotiate terms, and then provide financial negotiations for the cost of
So
producing
cool.
those results. And so I think that's the direction that we ended up taking it in. And I think the AI stuff, we had versions of it working, and I think for the final version, it was using another test chain to produce that transaction, if I remember correctly. But yeah, it was kind of fascinating. So,
Yeah.
and it sort of, it points like in this future direction where it made us realize that one of the very first things that we needed to do was to reach out to the marketplace and make that connection. So that's where like the sponsors of the event, like you're using their services to either post your AI agent as something that can do a particular task, and then you're using them to facilitate that as a catalog of different agents that you can request that task from.
Mm-hmm. It's like an app, right?
Yeah.
Like an
and
app
I think
store.
that's essentially.
But it's instead of apps, it's just agents. What do you want your agent to do? Sorry, keep going, Brent. Keep going.
And trying to figure out how to market that and sort of, not market it from a human perspective, but market it from an AI agent perspective.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So maybe that changes in the future. So there were lots of things that had happened very early on that were like, oh, wait a second, I didn't actually know this was part of the game. But this is something that we need to build for. We need to understand. So that was an early realization that we made.
Did my whiteboarding session help on Trump's coffee assistant? I remember you guys pulled me in. You're like, "Hey, what are we doing here?" And I tried to use this story, and I'm like, Trump, he's not going to go buy his own coffee. That's like an agent. He's going to send somebody else to do it. But it's funny that you said, not funny. It's kind of cool. You said you had this realization that, oh my God, this thing's might not negotiate like us because it's a robot. Have you heard of Gibberlink, that audio communication protocol between AIs? It was, I think it was announced last week. If not, but this.
Okay, I've seen a viral video.
Yeah, that video. So that's an interesting thought experiment right there, because we sort of mold things in our own design, and we've started going down this path where, okay, of course we're going to have, two things talk to each other. Ha 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 ha. That's funny. And then you realize, well, they're not us. So that how can you compress the rate of transmission to be faster? And all of a sudden you realize they don't have the same limitations as us, right? They don't have the wetware, so they can all of a sudden, you can have a hyper compressed, a new type of compression for these systems to communicate. And so back to your point about, okay, we had to figure out, how does an agent negotiate? I wish I was in the room when you guys had that conversation, because that would have been really cool to see what you guys came up with. Because I guess you would be able to give it some sort of terms, but then if it has any sense of semi-autonomy or autonomy, it's got to, potentially have some wiggle room. So how does the LLM just start to do that without being programmed? What did you guys end up coming up with for that part of the negotiation thing? Did you get into it in the weeds, or just very high level and just say, no, there's no negotiation, it's just a straight transaction?
I think for this one we went very high level.
Okay.
I have been thinking about it.
Yeah.
Since the hack event, and trying to figure out how wouldn't it be cool to create a negotiation AI agent, and sort of determine what you're negotiating. I think we did have a conversation about, what happens if they're on two different chains? Like, what happens if they have different types of currency that they're dealing with,
Oh,
or what if
yeah.
one of them wants to do barter versus currency,
Oh,
and how do you mitigate that
hmm,
and determine what a fair rate is? But that itself would be an interesting experiment,
totally.
um, just to see what it comes up with.
Yeah, yeah. 100%. And that's one of the things I've been thinking about leading into the event as well. And then to see, I've had this thought about it being a new interstitial layer, agentic flows. And I'm like, this is a new, it feels like a new part of the tech stack. And I couldn't quite like be solid about that. So I wasn't really talking about it in public. I have now, but I'm like, yeah, that solves interoperability problems that have been not only an issue in blockchain forever. Well, it still isn't solved. But I seen that problem in the AI space back from, speaking of you being to my other events back in the days when I ran IoT Waterloo events. I was trying to learn as a UX practitioner how to be relevant in a future when the screens disappear. That's one of my motivations behind running IoT Waterloo. I was like, oh man, if there's no screen, then how am I as a designer going to have any relevance? So I started getting into UX and figuring out about interaction design. And one of the things at that time was the Google Nest and the thermostat, or they had a couple in-home objects. And in the Google's ecosystem, they'll talk to each other no problem and share data. But then you had a competing marketplace for the smart door access doors. Open them with your phone or whatever. Smart door handles. Now, if that wasn't made from Google, and the fire alarm wasn't, or fire extinguisher, or maybe you had a smart smoke alarm, these things wouldn't talk to each other because of an interoperability problem where they're like, not only because it's hard to do, but I'm like, wouldn't it be beneficial if they could both figure out a value exchange between the two? Like in the event of a fire, let me open up my protocol, my communication to talk to the door to say unlock or something like this. But because they're two completely different competing systems and they don't want to talk to each other, there's the interoperability problem there that I thought, and that's a real deal breaker for this speculation that IoT was going to be a $50 billion industry. Because I was like, well, if these systems aren't talking to each other, we're going to have this times everything. Like nobody's going to want to open up. And this is where I'm thinking agents potentially, as you're describing, could then negotiate these terms. Hey, a new smart device showed up in the house. Under these conditions, I'll open up my API. Under these, I won't, blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden, there's this invisible potential communication that happens between agents, right? The agents that are like, that wasn't, I don't know if it was possible before. Haven't seen it done. Maybe it has, but I was thinking that you're onto something there. If you think about the ability for systems, complex systems, to negotiate stuff, they can talk about a lot of complexity real quick, come up with terms, and off they go. So have you thought about this or how else are you thinking about agents as far as, because you're now experienced, you won first place at the hackathon, and you're saying you're thinking about these things. So are you pursuing other side projects? What are you thinking about agents, Brent?
Well, I've just spent the past month working on this Google project, so I've been a bit focused on that. But now I'm working on rebuilding my personal portfolio so that it has it basically uses an agent to allow people to browse through my different projects, my history of projects. And I want to do lead generation. I want to do basically provide people with this ability to ask it questions and then handle that response,
Cool.
no matter which way they do it. So even if they're abusive to it, I really love putting the client's project through an abuse simulator, just to see how it handles it. I have a inordinate amount of fun working on systems like that. I've been using prompt foo and basically having databases of abusive CSV files that I probably shouldn't share, but they're way too much fun. So basically trying to figure out how you take an abusive conversation and then redirect it back to something that's useful for you. And so I've amassed all of this knowledge working with Google projects for the past couple of years, and now I'm trying to make it work for me. One of the other things that I'm really getting into recently is comfy UI workflows. And so from an AI agent marketplace direction, I'm really interested in having a hosted comfy UI workflow and then presenting that on the marketplace, so that if someone wanted some sort of visual effect that could be produced through comfy UI that they probably don't have the GPU resources on their personal system to produce, they can go out to the agent and then request their agent to go onto the marketplace, find me a comfy UI thing that does, X task, and then gives me the results, and then provides payment that way. So I thought that might be an early way of testing out to see if this thing actually works, and if it can actually make me some income from doing that.
Very cool. That's so cool. Brent, it's always good to connect with you. I know we don't have a lot of time. You might have to jump over to something else. So we covered a lot of ground about who you are, how you got into the type of work you do, your experience at the hackathon. What can we leave people with if they want to contact you? I'm going to put your LinkedIn into the show notes, but is there any other call to action that you would like to get if people watch this later, the recording later?
I'm this sounds like a lame pitch, but yeah, I'm a consultant, and I'm working in this space. You can find me at all one word, brentmarshall.tech, 2 L's on Marshall. So if you ever need technical direction on some of these projects, then I'm always open for stuff like that. I love building strange projects. So the stranger a project that you have, the more I'm tempted to say, yes, let's do it. So that's my website it needs a refresh in terms of the portfolio.
Well, you're working on that, putting an agent with it. So
yeah, I'm working on that right now. So that's sort of where my brain is at right now. I've got a bit of time after finishing the previous project.
Nice. All right, Brent, I will add that link to the show notes, and thank you so much for not only joining the hackathon and having some fun with us there, but thank you for taking time to jump on our show and share your story with others. And then we will connect probably at another event that I'll be running soon. All right.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Awesome. Okay, Brent. Cheers, man. Have a good day.
Thanks a lot. See you.
Bye.